We're just two veterans that are connecting with other veterans in the community to talk about business and all things life.
Hi, I'm John from Scott & Parker. We sell beanies, scarves and socks.
G'day, I'm Steve from Voortrekka, Australia. We're redefining the duffel bag.
And if you want to share your own service history, we have a digital platform where we will record that for you.
If you're interested in buying any of our products or interested in coming on the podcast, look at the links below in the description. So John, tell us about the recent episode that you did with Peter Fraser, where you travelled out to Gippsland to his house just to interview him personally.
Yeah, Steve, it was an amazing interview. I reached out to him. A friend of mine was at the air show in the media section, and Peter and then we're up at the air show, and he bumped into him and started speaking to him. And Peter spoke about their difficulties because he belongs to the Infantry Association. And he spoke about the difficulties in reaching out to people in the association, especially young veterans, because a lot of guys, they're really busy. And a lot of their support services involve having meetings and functions and social events in it. And the young guys just don't have time. You know, they're trying to keep a career going. They've got family, they've got school events, they've got so much on the go. They just don't have time for this. And he was just chatting there saying how difficult it is to reach out to these veterans.
Where is the organisation? Where's the association based then? Is it in Victoria?
Yeah, I think it's based out of Victoria. And so my friend gave me the contact. So I reached out to Peter and said, it would be great to chat. And Peter said, well, our sort of organisation where we do these interviews, and that could be a great forum to help them engage with younger veterans. So I also spoke to him about doing an interview of his experience in Vietnam. And he said he'd love to do that because he said a lot has been said by, there's been movies made about Long Tan and those type of battles, but the lesser known events, even though they were quite significant, have never been told, and little is known about that. And I was quite surprised.
I felt it was fascinating listening to some of those, the stories. He was a platoon commander, obviously, within his company, and, the responsibilities that he had in leadership, and making sure that his men, were looked after. It was quite amazing to hear that detail, and especially when they were preparing defensive positions, when they had there was a brigade attack them in their company or battalion defensive position. That detail was quite, captivating. And then just seeing the effects of, lack of sleep, all those different, tasks that they had in setting up their positions, having to move from place to place, going out on clearing patrols. Absolutely fascinating. So I really appreciate you bringing that, story to us through, the digital archive side of the historic military channels. So, did you feel that there's more story to be told from Peter as well?
Yeah, definitely. Because what was really interesting to me is I knew nothing about the battle before I went there to speak to him. And the first night, their one company, so that was the Battle of Coral.
Yeah.
And their company had I think it was a regiment attack against them. And they were not that well prepared for that level of attack because, as Peter said, they're used to getting a platoon level attack or a company attack on them, but not sort of a regiment type of attack. And then they were in that position the next day to try and prepare their positions for the same sort of attack. So they didn't. So they had a very short time. So that's why he said the first day their preparation was definitely not at the level. And if they'd been attacked that first day, they would have had tremendous problems. It was only by the second night they got attacked. Yeah. And by then they'd managed to get to a certain level of defense. So really interesting.
I'm just trying to recall. So it was a regiment on a company defensive position. Yeah. Okay.
No, I think there were Balmoral. I think they had 3 companies there.
Yes.
So that was the first time they had that sort of defensive position since Korea.
What I loved about Peter's interview was the detail that he had and he could recollect as well. Like, I think I got out of service only a few years ago and my brain's already, like a foggy mess. I can't. He could. He was talking about DFs, and he was talking about TOETs, all these acronyms that, as a veteran, you obviously relate to, really quickly. But I couldn't believe that he had that recollection of all that detail. I just thought that was also an amazing thing that, shows you the character of who he is. But I would have loved to have been there to be with you when you're interviewing, and hopefully in the future we can get down there together and, meet some of his, colleagues as well. So looking forward to that.
Really fascinating, because I think the interview was an hour and a half. And then I was down in Gippsland, and so they were very kind enough to invite me to stay for lunch and that. And then we continued to talk for another hour and a half. The only unfortunate thing, I didn't have my camera on.
You missed a bunch of vital information.
Yeah, he spoke because
just candid conversation.
Yeah, in the interview, we didn't. He focused a lot on what the Battle of Coral Balmoral and the operation Pinaroo into the long high hills.
Yes.
So he spoke a lot about that because that was quite significant. But when they first got in Vietnam, they'd only been there a week or two. They got sent into Barrier, which was street fighting. And there's a whole section on that, which we spoke about that after lunch.
And that wasn't something. That wasn't something they were prepared for in their, pre sort of deployment training, were they?
No, they'd never been trained in street fighting and that, so they had to use just common sense and that. So that was really fascinating. So, and the problem was when I was editing it, I kept thinking, where's all the stuff from Barrier? Because I remember telling me all this.
Yes, yeah.
And then only at the end I realized, no, that was spoken.
I love that part, even where he had, the CSM was the only man that had been trained to do low wire entanglement.
Yeah.
And that was because he had actually served in Korea. So, that detail, understanding the preparation, even, I love the way that you go about the digital archives and understanding that you're not there really to ask too much about things that people may feel uncomfortable about talking about. You'll ask those things that we're really interested about. What was the food like? Did you have enough supplies? Did you have the right equipment? Did you have the right training? I find that that's a really great approach to these interviews, because we're trying to understand more than just the story or the historic battle or the moments in time. We're trying to understand, how much effort, how much work it took to support those guys or, to ship there. I know that they arrived, I think it was, I'm just trying to recollect, I think it was a day after Christmas or something like that, or 2 days after Christmas, on a ship. That would have been hard for them to be away from their families, young men, serving overseas, unknown country, unknown enemy. Yeah, it's pretty stressful stuff that, a lot of us veterans have been through.
But I think that's why important. So this, as I always say to the guys, this is for veterans and other veterans, because if you speak about some of these things, someone who hasn't been a veteran, they won't understand.
Yeah.
And they'll think it's boring.
Yeah.
But for veterans, they will relate 100%.
Yeah.
When you talk about working all day and standing two for half the night.
Yeah.
And then the next day you're working flat out all day, and then you stand two the next night. So you're basically not sleeping.
Yeah.
I was go for nights and nights with that. And then you've got very little water, you've got very little food for all types of reasons, because they can't get the rations in when they should. And you always look at these we call them rat packs, but these ration packs for the pack. And I say, okay, that's a ration pack for a whole day. And you look at it and think, oh, I could survive on that.
Yeah.
And what happens is the convoys or the guys bringing in your resupply 3 days can't make it or whatever. So then they say, oh, don't worry, just stretch your pack for another day or another 2 days or whatever.
Yeah.
But now you're suddenly living on that for 3 days.
Yeah.
And those things is only if you've been a veteran that you understand that.
I could relate to a bunch of stuff. It was so interesting, especially when, talking about ration packs, the Australian, ration pack is designed to sort of be, sort of a shoeboxy type size, maybe a little bit smaller than a shoebox. And it has 24 hours worth of rations, breakfast, lunch and dinner, your snacks, your coffee, all those kind of things. Obviously back in Vietnam, probably not as advanced as what they definitely are now. You know, they're actually, you can make quite a decent meal out of where they're at the moment for the current ADF. But the relatability part for me was when he said some days we'd have to have the American ration packs. Theirs was the same size. Their one meal was the same size as our 24-hour meal. And a lot of the stuff was just fluff or rubbishy food. And the same thing is currently, what goes on when we're in Iraq and Afghanistan. You'd sometimes, have to eat what was available, which was the American ones. And although it's quite a treat at times, you get I know one of them had like chocolate chip cookie, a big chocolate chip cookie, quite delicious, but not very nutritious. so it was interesting to reflect and know exactly what he was talking about, even to the point where, that working, that constant grind when you're on deployment or on exercise, for some people that maybe didn't deploy, you still experience the same kind of tempos and timelines, where I know I'd be in certain positions and I just wouldn't even get any sleep. You're sort of the officers, so you're planning, you're trying to make sure everything's right. You maybe get 2-3 hours sleep a day. Yes, you're not doing gun pickets, but you're doing all that planning and busyness and thinking about the next steps and, listening to orders and things like that. I can relate to that a lot as well, because if you're not a veteran, maybe if you're a family member listening for the first time, these guys will work for days and days and days with very little sleep. And just, we're talking about, 22-hour days of just grind, digging holes, moving stuff, working hard. And that's just expected of you. There's no weekends off, or, time in lieu. That just doesn't happen when you're out there doing, this kind of business. So it's quite interesting, isn't it?
But I think it's also the stress of coming under fire, or you're not sure if you're going to come under fire or not. So that's also that stress.
Yeah.
But what's interesting now is Peter's what I want to talk to him about is the Battle of Balmoral, and that's street fighting. And so he's going to talk to one of the other platoon commanders, and we're going to try and get him on the show, because Peter said he actually should have been issued with a medal for his involvement in the Battle of Balmoral, but he was never issued because at that time they had a limit on the number of medals that could be issued for a company and a regiment. So once they got to the quota, they said, "Oh no, we can't issue any more medals."
Yeah.
So guys didn't get medals for the simple reason of a quota.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to tell these type of stories, because these are stories that probably won't get told on television shows or films won't be made out of them, but they're very important stories and they should be remembered for what they were.
That's the legacy what we're trying to provide through this service is trying to capture those stories, in a digital archive, so that, obviously no one lasts forever. That the generations can obviously reflect and come back and have a look at their uncle, their granddad, their brother, whoever. Also all the women that served as well. We want to tell your stories too. So grandmothers, mothers, sisters. That's what we want to do. We want to try and preserve that legacy and try and tell that story, and not sensationalize it, not try and misrepresent it. It's just your reflection, your interpretation of what happened, your observations. So that's what we want to record.
Yeah, often people think, "Oh, well, I didn't do anything exciting," but it's your story, so it doesn't matter how. As long as it's a story, we'll record it and do it for you. So don't think that it wasn't exciting, wasn't important. Every story is important.
That's great, John. I can't wait to hear the next episode. On that. Path from Vietnam. I'm talking to those gentlemen. So I look forward to that.